is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, on Thursday of this week, the NHS is going to be 70. Yep, it's reached its 70, and we've all used it, and it matters to all of us. All of us, I think, have got good things to say about it. Some of us have got, at times, less good things to say about it. It is a massive organisation. I mean, take this on board. The NHS is the world's 5th largest employer. 1.5 million people, but the US Department of Defense is 3.2 million. The Chinese People's Liberation Army is 2.3 million. Walmart is 2.3 million. And McDonald's, 1.9 million. But it's the 5th biggest employer in the world. And yet, that isn't enough. Because today, NHS England has launched the biggest recruitment drive in its history in a bid to attract more applicants for its understaffed roles. And in particular, the £8 million campaign is going to be aimed at children aged 14 to 18. There are going to be TV adverts, radio adverts, posters, social media. And what they're really trying to do is to get young people to think that getting into nursing would be a good thing. Now, the argument, of course, raged during the referendum about what did immigration and an increased population mean for the National Health Service. I've always argued what it meant was massively more pressure. We actually have a population crisis in Britain. Our population went up by 330,000 last year, 500,000 the year before. But the argument always comes the other way. But there are so many foreign doctors and nurses within the NHS. How on earth would it function without them? And my view on this has always been, well, why are we not recruiting enough people? Why are there not more spaces on nurse training courses? And why have we not been encouraging young people to go into it? So I would say, looking on the face of it, this is about time too. Well, this morning, Professor Jane Cummings, who's heading up this campaign, was on LBC with Nick Ferrari, and this is what she had to say.
What we want to do is really explain to the public and to school children and to those that might want to change of career what the NHS can provide, and particularly what the wide range of opportunities there are.
Normally you have recruitment drives if recruitment is a bit slow. Are we not doing particularly well in recruiting our own doctors and nurses?
What we really need to do to deliver the new plan, the improvements in care, is to actually recruit even more. And that's why we want to do that. We want to keep the people we've got, to really reinforce the great role they have, but want it to be a career of choice for students at school.
Sell it to young people getting ready to go to school now, possibly even in cars. Why should they consider a career professor in the NHS?
Because there are 350 different careers in the NHS, but the one thing that we all do is we make a difference to people's lives. And we do that 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And actually, it's a huge privilege. It's a fantastic opportunity to make a difference to somebody.
Has Brexit influenced the situation for the recruitment and staff within the NHS? There is a feeling that a lot of European national doctors, nurses, clinicians and others have thought they're concerned and have raced back across the channel. How true is that?
There is some truth in the fact that the number of applications to join our nursing register is reduced, and actually we've had some more turnover for people from the European Union. The people that we've got, we really welcome them. We want to have staff from overseas. We want people to work for us that actually reflect the population that we've got and the diversity of our population. So we've asked hospitals and providers to really put their hands out to welcome our EU nurses and to make them feel needed and wanted, because they are.
Well, that's all fine, but we should be training our own people. I just haven't understood for years why we're not doing it. So actually, overall, I do support this campaign. Let's get out to 14 to 18-year-olds. Let's say nursing, medicine is a very rewarding career to be in. But hey, it's also a very challenging career to be in. My first wife was a nurse, and she still is a nurse. And she was completely dedicated to the job that she did. And you're supposed, of course, not to get emotional about patients you look after but die and all the rest of it. Believe me, anybody working in medicine does. So it's a rewarding job, but it can be a very, very tough job and a hell of a strain upon people. And so the question I really want to ask is, would you encourage someone to work in the NHS? Would you encourage your son or daughter to apply to be a nurse, to go through the training to be a doctor? And I want to know particularly, if you are currently a nurse or doctor, would you recommend it as a career, given your experience of working within the NHS? Call me if you are on 0345 6060 973, and if you want, we can of course protect your name. Tell me, as a patient, how do you feel those that work within the NHS are doing? Do you find people that love what they're doing and are fully focused on the job, or do you find people actually very, very heavily stressed and perhaps overworked? And please, if you think this recruitment drive actually is a little bit too little too late, that we should have done this years ago, then please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, watch me on Facebook. We're live from Strasbourg in the European Parliament, where we've been debating the ongoing battle between the new Italian government and Mrs. Merkel. Steve in Islington is my first caller. Steve, what's your experience of the NHS?
Well, fortunately, I haven't had to use the NHS that much. So,
right.
But when I have used it, it has been a good experience, although there are sometimes delays, but that's usually been with A&E and such like. But I would encourage people to join the NHS. I'd have no problem trying to persuade my family, if they wanted to go into the NHS, to go into the NHS. I think it's an honourable profession. And I think, like the Army, it has a lot of skills to offer people, a variety of very rewarding skills, and I think it is worthwhile. But I think what we should be looking at more is trying to find out why people are leaving the profession, because we have a huge exodus from people who are leaving the NHS, and I think we should try and re-recruit those that we've spent time and money obtaining those skills.
I get that, Steve. I mean, doctors who we actually spend a lot of money on helping to get trained, who maybe do 18 months and go off to America or Australia or whatever it is, and that is wrong. But Steve, we have not been training enough people to go into nursing and to be doctors, and we've relied on bringing people in, not just from Europe. We hear about EU nurses and doctors. They've been coming in from all over the world. And Steve, my feeling's always been that in many cases, the countries that these nurses and doctors are coming from probably need that care even more acutely than we do. Why, Steve? Why do you think we've not been training enough in the first place of our own people?
I think it's just a question of costs. We do the same with our footballers. Rather than train our own footballers, we choose to buy them from other countries. So I think it's just purely a cost basis rather than investing for the long term, which it seems that politicians are very bad at doing in this country. We tend to go for the short-term option, which makes them look very good running up to the next election. But
one of the points,
I think we should train more of our local.
Yeah, I mean, one of the points, Steve, of course, is that nobody from 2004 anticipated the very, very substantial rise in our population. So in that sense, it was tough to plan ahead once we'd opened the door. Your question as to why people are leaving, I don't know. But when I've discussed this before on LBC, I get people ringing in who are working in nursing or have recently left nursing, and they've just said that the pressures and stresses of working in the NHS are worse than they've ever been. That's what I've had before. Steve, I thank you for your call. Nursing is a dedication. If you're not passionate about it, you'll never be any good. And yes, I would and have encouraged anyone who showed an interest in working for the NHS. Angela, thank you for that. Hi, Nigel. Yes, we have lots of Europeans in the NHS, but that is the skill level that we should be able to choose to come in. Ian, I completely get that. One of the main arguments about uncontrolled migration was too many unskilled people. I get that, although I do say in many cases those countries could do with those skills themselves. John is calling from Hailsham. John, good evening.
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. Well, I'd like to just say, unfortunately, I'm actually the wrong side of 70 now, and when I was a younger person...
You should be John, you should be celebrating that, surely.
Yeah, I mean, Nigel, when I was a younger man, I had to go in hospital, and it's quite funny. Virtually all the nurses I seem to remember at that time were all British nationals, and it's a shame the way things have changed that we haven't managed to keep the career to be attractive enough for our own people to go in. Clearly, as you have stated yourself, we've not been training enough of our own people, simply because perhaps the job hasn't been attractive to go into.
How do we make it attractive, John? I mean, What is it? Do young girls and boys now not want to be nurses? Perhaps a lot more of them would 30, 40, 50 years ago. I don't know.
Well, I think obviously, Nigel, years ago it was always considered a really good career move for people to go into. People went into that kind of career because they had a caring attitude to people. Perhaps nowadays, maybe for a lot of the British people themselves, it's not considered to be such a wonderful thing to go into, but I think it should be. It should be still a wonderful career to go, because obviously, they're certainly doing a great job for people, aren't they?
Well, of course. Maybe it's the money, though, John. I mean, a registered nurse who's trained will earn an average salary of £23,000 a year. Now, yeah, sure, there are opportunities for overtime and all the rest of it, but that is, once you're qualified, the basic wage for a nurse. Maybe people think, do you know what? They're going to work me like crazy. It's going to be very stressful. They're not really going to pay me. Maybe that puts people off.
Well, I think you may well be right on that one, Nigel. The problem is, of course, obviously, all the time we keep allowing our population to increase by 500,000 a year.
The pressure gets worse and worse.
National Health's always going to be under a terrible strain to cope with that kind of population increase all the time, isn't it?
Yep, and we haven't planned ahead for population, and we haven't planned ahead for the health service. In fact, I wonder sometimes, John, what we have planned ahead for. Didn't plan ahead for Brexit either. Hey, John, thank you. Nigel, I've been nursing for over 30 years in acute care. Never would I encourage my children to go into nursing, and successfully talk my son out of going into medicine. The sad thing was, all the doctors I worked with agreed with me and told him no. Gosh, that's anonymous. It sounds terrible. Well, we're spending £8 million of public money appealing to 14 to 18-year-olds to get involved, to become nurses, to become doctors. I say about time too. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 7:15.
The NHS.
The NHS.
The NHS are lifesavers.
70 years of the NHS on LBC.
The NHS is really, really important to me. I've used it on so many different occasions.
I think we've all got experiences of using the NHS. Maybe some of us not so good, because we all know that the NHS faces a lot of challenges.
When my mum was in one of her early pregnancies, she almost died, and the NHS saved her life, which I'm particularly pleased about because I was one of her later pregnancies.
I've recently been down at the Western Eye Hospital being looked after in a way that beggars belief.
They've helped me with my children, they've helped me with myself, but they literally were lifesavers for my brother. Happy birthday, NHS.
70 years of the NHS. All this week on LBC.
We all like choice, the freedom to choose, to be given options, which is why at Change Exchange we developed a recruitment platform that can post your vacancy to over 200 specialist agencies. One platform that gives you a wider choice of agencies to work with, featuring pre-vetted candidates. There's no subscription fee. You simply choose in advance the fixed fee you want to pay for each filled vacancy. Change the way you recruit with Change Exchange. Search online for Change Exchange Recruitment Marketplace.
You've had those damp patches on the walls for a while now. And like a lot of people, you do nothing, even though it's a health risk and it's damaging your property. So get it sorted once and for all with London Damp Specialists. They offer a standard 30-year guarantee on all their work, and it's usually ready to paint in around 10 days. But best of all, they won't take any payment until your walls are completely dry. Search LondonDampSpecialists.com, where you only pay when it's dry.
What do you need to get the very best start in your media career? How about state-of-the-art TV and music studios, industry-beating radio studios, the very latest technology, the opportunity to learn from the best minds in the industry? At a school where you can study GCSEs and A-levels alongside the vocational media qualifications you need. Your future is here. The Global Academy, a forward-thinking state school for 14 to 19-year-olds interested in a media career. Visit globalacademy.com to find out more.
You want a Maserati, but you need an SUV. Why not have both? Levante, the Maserati of SUVs. Now available with 0% finance. Search Maserati. Based on PCP sales only until the 31st of August 2018. Minimum 20% deposit, 24-month term, 10,000 miles per annum. Subject to status. Participating dealers only. Maserati Financial Services.
Beer, pizza, football, marvellous.
Right now, Co-op Super Saver deal is any 2 Co-op thin and crispy margarita or pepperoni pizzas plus a 4-pack of Budweiser bottles for just £5.
And I'm wearing my lucky shirt.
Oh, great. The one you were wearing last time we lost.
Subject to availability, 5 deals per customer. See Co-op stores for details.
London North Eastern Railway is now operating Virgin Trains East Coast service. You'll see the name changing to LNER, but that'll be about the only difference you'll notice. You can rest assured that all existing Virgin Trains tickets will still be valid, and the services are being maintained. So there'll be no need to rejig your travel plans. Visit lner.co.uk for details.
This is LBC, live from Strasbourg, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
On the week of its 70th birthday, NHS England has launched the biggest recruitment drive in its history. An £8 million campaign through TV, radio, posters and social media is going to target children aged 14 to 18 to get more people to sign up to become nurses and doctors. And not before time, I would say, but we also need to understand why people who have been trained are often leaving the profession. I'm particularly keen to hear from any of you, that have been in nursing, that are still in nursing, that have left nursing. What are the good sides? What are the bad sides? And I want to hear, especially from parents, would you encourage your children to get involved and to become nurses or doctors? I want to know the reasons why we're not recruiting enough people. We've got to spend all this money. But first, 4 months ago, we had a new Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson, and I didn't know much about him. But after the Salisbury poisoning incident, he gave a speech, and this is what he said.
It is absolutely atrocious and outrageous what Russia did in Salisbury. We have responded to that. Frankly, Russia should go away, it should shut up.
I thought, goodness gracious me, it must be a mistake. That chap can't possibly be our Defence Secretary, can he? And some people criticised me, thought I was being a bit mean. Then we got the story breaking in one of the Sunday newspapers that he told some of the chiefs, and of course they want more money for defence, we want to stay as a Tier 1 player, and he told Defence that as far as Mrs May was concerned, he said to them, I made her so I could break her. I thought, crikey, this bloke thinks he's appearing in an episode of The West Wing. So I've been dubious, to say the least, about the quality of this individual to be a cabinet member. Well, today, in the House of Commons, Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson was giving this speech, and this is what happened.
Valley and surrounding areas.
I found something on the web for in Syria, Syrian Democratic Forces supported by President...
What a very rum business that is.
An intervention. No, but I do apologise for that. It is very rare that you're heckled by your own mobile phone.
Indeed.
On this occasion, it is a new parliamentary convention, without a doubt. So if I may proceed, Mr Speaker, without the help and support of Siri.
Oh dear. So there he is. He's at the dispatch box in the chamber of the House of Commons, and he's got his telephone on, and he's obviously said something that's triggered Siri, and Siri says, I found something on the web for Syrian Democratic Forces supported by. I mean, it just is. I thought Burko was quite funny, actually, very rum business. I just thought, how low grade can you get? So, folks, those of you that think I'm sort of launching this campaign of dislike against Gavin Williamson, all I'm saying is that time and again he seems to say and do things that are cringe-worthily embarrassing. Are these the people running our country? Well, the answer is yes. Actually, they are. Back to nursing. Back to why we're not training, planning, recruiting enough. Back to, would you encourage people to go into nursing? And if you're in nursing, what's it really like? Yep, sure, we know it can be very, very rewarding, very fulfilling. But hey, it's pretty tough too from what I hear. Let's go to Jolie from Acton, a new caller to the show. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
Welcome.
Basically, I work for NHS, and I've got a colleague whose daughter is very keen to study medicine, and she's a brilliant student, and she's got brilliant marks as well. But the mother, she thinks that this is going to not give her a good social life or a good family life, I should say. And hence she's discouraging the daughter to become a doctor.
And is that because of the working hours, Jolie?
Yeah, working hours, the stress, everything together. I mean, we work in an intensive care unit, and the stress is different, but every unit is the same, pretty much the same. So it is very disheartening to see a child who really wants to become a doctor is being discouraged by a person who is working in NHS. And the reasons are quite justifiable from a mother's point of view, but not quite sure because I don't agree with it. But she absolutely thinks that.
It sounds a bit sad to me, Jolie, because if you've got a young person, who's got real ability and has got a vision for what he or she wants to do, I would have thought they should be encouraged as much as possible. And surely a lot of jobs, not all, but a lot of jobs in life that are rewarding do mean people work long hours and do mean people suffer a bit of stress.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if my children wanted, wholeheartedly, I would be supporting them. But unfortunately, there are parents, and I just wanted to emphasize that there are parents who work for NHS and think that NHS is not the place for their children to be in because of the stress and everything that goes on, sadly.
I wonder whether, Jolie, that stress within the NHS is worse now than it was, say, 30 years ago. That's the thing that I'm really curious about.
I don't know about 30 years ago. I have joined NHS only 10 years back, and I can surely say it's worse already in 10 years.
It's worse in 10 years. Right, OK, well, here was I being critical of that parent putting off their youngster from joining, but if it's getting worse and worse and worse, maybe the parent's got a point. Jolie, great phone call. Interesting point of view. So parents want their kids to follow their dreams, but they also want their kids to have lives that they're going to be successful in and happy in. And clearly from what Jolie's saying, in this particular case, the parent's feeling is that the child will not be happy doing it, will not have a proper family life because it's just too tough. We do invest in doctors and nurses. We stupidly train them for years at huge expense and then allow them to leave to work privately. We are stupid to allow this, says John from York. John, I'm all for the old-fashioned system of indentures. If people are being trained to become doctors and ultimately to earn good money, if they disappear off to the private sector or disappear off to Australia or whatever it is, I would have thought they owe us some money back. That would seem perfectly reasonable to me. But if you disagree with that, folks, 0345 6060 973. Nigel, I visited my doctor yesterday and in a limited time available, I asked her about stress levels. Her reply was, we live in a nice area, which makes it okay. But, she said, London doctors were leaving in droves and heading for Canada, says Richard in Cheltenham. Well, Richard, there are some very nice parts of London too, but I'm sure there are some parts of London in which being a doctor is very, very challenging indeed. Simon is calling from Gloucester. Good evening, Simon.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well. So would you encourage somebody to become a nurse or a doctor?
Not in the NHS.
Not in the NHS?
No.
Why?
Because the way you're treated when you're on the ward, the way you just have no time for anything. They don't give you enough staff. There's so much pressure to be able to achieve anything. You pay for your own parking. You can't even have a free cup of tea. I mean, geez, you hardly ever get a break.
Do you work in nursing, Simon, or?
Yeah, I do work in nursing. I work for an agency at the moment. My wife's was trained in the Philippines. She works here as a HCA, but because she's from the Philippines, the test she has to do is harder than if she was from the EU. The nurses from the EU only have to do adaptation. Nurses from outside of the EU have to do OSCE, CBT, loads of stuff. It made it very, very difficult.
Well, that applies across the board. Easy for people from the EU and tough for people outside. I mean that's and again, maybe with Brexit we'll start treating everybody the same side. But Simon, why? I mean, is it much worse working within the NHS now than it was when you started?
Yeah, because there's too much pressure. They don't give. There's not. You see, if the law brought in a minimum amount of staff that you have to have on per patient on wards, Yeah?
Yeah.
Instead of being advisory, it would work, but they've never allowed that. So you end up with minimum amount of staff, so you've got so much to do, but not enough staff and not enough time to do it within. There are some hospitals, if you haven't done your notes by the time your shift is finished, you will stay to whatever time you finish them and then come back in for an early shift that starts at 7:30. So some nurses are there till midnight and then still coming in at 7:30. The NHS doesn't treat its staff very well. Staff aren't leaving because of Brexit. Staff are leaving because there's better pay, better conditions in other parts of the world. And that's
interesting.
It.
And Simon, do you think Mrs May's £20 billion for the NHS will make any difference at all?
No, because the problems still exist. I mean, you don't just throw some money at some stuff. It's like the broken down car that you're going to throw some money at. Unless you actually sort the same. It's the same with nurses. If you're saying you want nurses from other parts of the world, then if you've already, hospitals are collecting nurses from the Philippines, they've assessed those hospitals and the staff to have similar qualities to their own staff. So why then do you add hundreds of tests to make it more difficult? Why not say, well, we've assessed similar skills, so we'll make it easier for them to work while you wait and train your own?
I have to say, Simon, you do not make it sound like a very attractive thing for 14 to 18-year-olds to go into. Thank you for the call. Sounds from a lot of people like working in the NHS is getting more and more difficult, and quite a few people, Simon, one of them, who works in that profession, would not encourage young people to go into the NHS, which is a bit of a grim story, really, isn't it? You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusive in LBC, live from Strasbourg, and it's now 7:30, and time for the news with Thomas Watts.
12 boys and their football coach trapped in a flooded cave in Thailand will be brought out in the coming days. An army official says it needs to be as soon as possible because more rain is forecast. A woman's been arrested on suspicion of murdering 8 babies and attempting to kill 6 others at a hospital. Officers have been investigating a string of deaths at the Countess of Chester Hospital. A paedophile's been found guilty of abusing young footballers over a period of 25 years. George Ormond, whose roles included coaching Newcastle United's academy prospects, will be sentenced this week. LBC Weather, a largely dry night with clear spells for many, more humid than last night with the odd isolated shower in the south, an overnight low of 11 degrees.
LBC Travel, it's slow on the M3 southbound between the M25 and Junction 3 for Lightwater after an accident, and the M11 is crawling northbound at Junction 7 for Harlow where a lorry has broken down. There are queues on the North Circular Road eastbound from Arnos Grove to the Kenninghall interchange. That's because a lane is closed for emergency works, and in Southwark, Tooley Street is closed westbound near Tower Bridge Road because of a demonstration. On the tubes, the Central Line has severe delays after a train broke down. LBC Travel, I'm Charlotte Downs.
This is LBC.
With Clearabee, getting rid of rubbish is quick, easy and affordable.
Clear rubbish easily. Clearabee. JustTrader.com.
Sometimes you just fancy a restyle. A new bathroom, perhaps a new kitchen. But as with all stylish things, you'll want to make sure that they're fitted to perfection. That's where Trusted Trader are always on hand to help. TrustedTrader.com have lots of really lovely tradespeople who are vetted, reviewed and reliable, so you'll find the professional you need, including an expert who'll design and install that gorgeous new kitchen or bathroom.
JustTrader.com.
Get the kettle on, put the TV on, turn the lights on, turn the lights off, put the dinner on, turn the heating up, turn the heating down. Crikey! We use so much energy every day, it's exhausting and expensive. But with a smart meter, you get an expected average saving of 354 kilowatt hours. That might not mean much, but if we all got one, we could save the same amount of energy as it takes to power Manchester, Liverpool and Newcastle for a year. Save your energy for powering cities. Contact your energy supplier about getting your free smart meter.
Based on BEI's expected average annual savings of 2%, participating suppliers and eligible customers only. Savings possible by measuring energy usage and reducing wastage.
Dearest Aunt Sarah, I hope this letter finds you in the rudest of health. My passage to America was, I can say without exaggeration, the most singular experience of my life. Travelling in a class to which I've not been accustomed was simply wondrous, and my meagre vocabulary struggles to find the words to truly do it justice. But what I can say without hesitation is that it was savage, boom, ting, and proper lit. Peace out, Susie.
Spend on our new Virgin Atlantic Reward credit card and upgrade your flight. Upgrade and feel proper posh. Representative 22.9% APR variable. Virgin Atlantic is an appointed representative of Virgin Money PLC. Spend £20,000 on a Virgin Atlantic Reward credit card within a 12-month period to receive an upgrade from Economy Classic to Premium when you book a reward flight. Visit virginatlantic.com/proper posh to find out more.
Blimey!
That's a Swale heating engineer setting off to help another customer. We have over 250 highly qualified engineers on hand 24 hours a day, 365 days a year to deal with your boiler installations and emergency breakdowns. Visit swaleheating.com. Rely on us to keep you warm.
Landlords, Direct Line guarantees to beat other insurers' renewal premiums for the same cover. Can your insurance do that? Switch to Direct Line Landlord. New customers only. Qualifying criteria apply. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
This is LBC, live from Strasbourg, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
We badly need to recruit more nurses. A big £8 million NHS campaign is being aimed at 14 to 18-year-olds to encourage them to go into the profession. But I'm getting phone calls and texts and tweets from those of you who've been in the profession saying, do you know what? The stress levels are getting worse and worse, and that they would not recommend a friend or a child of theirs to go into nursing or into becoming a doctor, which I find a little bit depressing because it is a very important profession and clearly a very honourable thing for people to do. Has something really gone wrong inside the culture of the NHS, such that people are telling their children don't become a nurse or don't become a doctor? But before I get back to that, do you remember a couple of weeks ago, families who were caught illegally trying to get into the United States of America? The parents and children were being separated. There were howls of outrage in America. Trump then changed the policy and said, try to keep the families together. Mrs. May, from the dispatch box, of course, condemned these awful scenes. There was a big hue and cry. And I said on this show that night that routinely in this country, if people are found to be in this country or coming into this country illegally, parents and children are separated. But of course, nobody seemed to believe me. Well, today, an organisation called Bail for Immigration Detainees said it deals with around 170 cases of families every year who are split up because of immigration enforcement. Yep, it's happening in this country. In fact, it happened to Kenneth Oronendu, who was here in this country. He had a conviction for drug smuggling. He shouldn't be here. His wife, who was here legally, was away. He dropped the kids off at school. Somebody reported him. And guess what happened? He was arrested and the children were taken to a detention centre a couple of 100 miles away. So it's happening in this country. We're separating children and parents for periods of time that I frankly don't know and nobody can answer. So where are you all? Why aren't you screaming at Mrs. May, the hypocrite who attacks Donald Trump when her own government does the self-same thing? I haven't heard a word. I'm listening. Back to, would you recommend a son or a daughter or a friend to become a nurse or a doctor? Nigel, one of the major things putting people off training now is the fact that the government, I agree with this, have ended NHS bursaries and free tuition fees for those studying nursing, etc. at uni. Richard, ex-ambulance service. Richard, I absolutely made sure that in the 2015 UKIP manifesto, when I led the party into that general election, one of the things we said is there would not be tuition fees for those studying the subjects for which we're short of people, the STEM subjects, and of course nursing was part of that. Engineering, technology, mathematics, all of it. But yeah, we should actually be helping our young people and guiding them into these professions by removing tuition fees in those areas. I'm totally and utterly with you. Nursing, anyone who chooses this career will regret it. Low pay, antisocial shifts, high stress, huge caseloads, and the headache that low social care funding is causing. Now the pensions have been attacked. There's frankly no point unless you don't need the money. More negativity coming in, and I sense with some of these messages and some of these phone calls, there's a lot of passion behind it. Doctors and nurses have it hard. I suggest that the UK taxpayer pay for university, but they are legally required to work for 5 to 10 years to repay it. Chris, it's the indentures idea that I was talking about earlier. I do think, Yep, get rid of tuition fees. Let's invest in people. But once we've invested in people, I think we do deserve to get a fair bit back from them. David is calling from Northampton, a new caller to the show. Welcome, David.
Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening. So, would you encourage a youngster to become a nurse?
My daughter is studying to be a nurse.
Right, okay.
My wife is a nurse.
Right.
Has been for over 20 years, over 25 years.
Yep.
Stress levels are sky high.
Yeah.
The problem, one of the major problems, is that everybody is terrified of being sued by the actual patients. If a patient doesn't like something, they put in complaints continually over the tiniest little thing. And they actually get serial complainers, which makes the job incredibly difficult for them. My wife has come home before in absolute tears. As I say, my daughter's studying to be a nurse. She was a HCA. She's now studying at uni.
So, David, despite seeing your wife doing a tough job, and, as you say, the modern worry, which we've sort of got from America in many ways, that the fear of being sued, despite all of this, your daughter's going into nursing.
She is. She absolutely adores it.
Right.
And she can't think of anything better. She really can't. She's such a caring, kindly girl. It's funny, they sometimes work on the same wards because my daughter actually has to work 7 days a week, 5 days studying, and 2 days what they call bank shifts at the hospital to make ends meet, seeing as the bursaries for study to become a nurse from a HCA have been cut by 50%.
I know. Isn't it odd? We've cut all these things, and now we're going to spend £8 million encouraging 14 to 18-year-olds to become nurses. David, your story is an interesting one, though, isn't it? Because the story of your family is, your wife has been involved in it, and your daughter is going into it, eyes wide open, knowing it's going to be tough, but she wants to do it. And all I can say is, we're going to need, David, a lot more people like your daughter in this country. But I worry, David, about the number of negative messages I'm getting tonight.
The amount of people that have left the service, and a lot of that is all down to stress, where they literally cannot cope anymore, is absolutely frightening. Where my wife works, on her team, they have lost 60% of her team. Gosh. And they have not been able to recruit anybody to replace.
That's not sustainable for very long, David, is it?
No. So as you can imagine from that, the stress levels are frightening.
Sounds absolutely awful. David, I thank you for your family story on that. Very interesting. Nigel, why is it only doctors and nurses who are reported as being stressed? Stress is widespread across the NHS in all roles. The recent pay rise is a sweetener. It won't change how bad the conditions are. I would never encourage anyone to join the NHS. Anonymous texter, former NHS employee. I worked in nursing for 10 years. When first qualified, I worked in intensive care and high dependency. I left after 4 years to work in the private sector. NHS nurses are overworked, don't get paid anywhere near what they should do for what they have to do. Always understaffed, run off your feet, barely get a break to sit down. A lot of the time, I just used to work through my breaks. They stay late, and she goes on and on and on. Angeline, no wonder you moved to the private sector, is all I can say. It sounds really tough. On Facebook, I get, remove the need to have a degree. Nursing comes from the heart, not from a piece of paper. You could be overlooking brilliant nurses who may not be academic, but empathetic. Far more important. Tina, I have to say, I do wonder why people need degrees for almost everything in the world these days. I haven't quite caught up with that. David is calling from Edinburgh, and he's a new caller to the show. David, good evening.
Oh, hi, Nigel. I think Richard made most of my point, really. My main thing is my wife's a nurse in the Navy, and I get to see both sides, and the difference in their life's horrendous. I mean, in the Navy, you start off really good wage, really, and you get your own house. You get a lot of additional factors, and you get regular working hours, to be honest. And when she's talking about her friends, I mean, the reason I did phone up was where you were saying about if you get something out the system, you should put something back in. But as Richard said, that's changed now. You don't get anything paid for, so you're landed with a typical student's fees, and then you've got to pay them back if you ever reach a wage where you're going to be able to do that. But you think on it, I mean, 23 grand a year, university bills, and then see the amount of nurses you know that end up with black eyes, beat and bruised because they're doing A&E on a Friday and Saturday night.
It just sounds horrendous, doesn't it? Yeah.
We're Birmingham-based. I mean, Nigel, remember, one of the biggest ways of recruiting is word of mouth. I was in the army for 24 years, and the youngsters, they ask the old-timers like myself what it's like, and we tell them about the pension, how it's been decimated and everything else. And word of mouth, and they hear and they listen, and it puts them really off. You know, I mean, when you look at that, I mean, I'd be honest with you, a lot of nurses I know, they live a harder life than being in infantry. Infantry get paid more.
So what you're saying, David, actually, is that actually the armed forces treat people with far more respect than the NHS. That's kind of the message you're giving me, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, they're paid much better. I mean, you're looking at not long before you're in 30 grand a year, you're getting your own house.
Yeah,
on the system. You've got a long-term career, and you've got loads of courses, get the option to go on and do your master's degree quite easily, you know, doing all of that.
I can hear applications, David, heading towards the armed forces to work in the medical departments of each of them.
Incredible difference, and you see the strain in my pals,
very
some of the faces
yeah,
and the rest of it, you know, and it's the same with the military. I mean, the pension went from 10 grand a year, I was a sergeant, down to 3 grand a year. Yeah. So you go from a top-up job to needing to start a new career from scratch, and you've got to look at it that way. And my main thing is, if you do it everywhere, why do you do this? Millions in advertising, but we'll cut the bursaries at the same time. Advertising money in bursaries.
Maybe we got it the wrong way round. No, David, great call. Really interesting too, actually, that, isn't it? You know, in the Navy, as a nurse, treated reasonably well. As a nurse in the NHS, maybe not treated very well. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, live from Strasbourg. It's 7:46.
Coming up at 8 on LBC, Clive Bull.
So the latest idea to raise money for the NHS is to put up duty for drivers and drinkers. Would you mind paying more for alcohol and fuel?
Clive Bull on LBC.
Ocean Credit Card.
If you're looking for a credit card with a credit limit of up to £1,500, go to checkocean.co.uk and see in seconds if you'll be accepted for an Ocean credit card before you apply. Checking won't affect your credit rating, so it's a no-brainer. Find out if it's a yes. Go now to checkocean.co.uk. 39.9% APR representative variable. Intelligent Lending Limited is a credit broker. Capital One is the exclusive lender.
Checkocean.co.uk.
Your data matters to the NHS. Information about your health and care helps us improve your individual care, plan your local services, and research new treatments. The strict rules about how this data can and cannot be used have been strengthened. We're committed to keeping your information safe and being clear about how it is used. You can choose whether your confidential patient information is used for research and planning. To find out more, search Your NHS Data Matters. This has been brought to you in association with the Information Commissioner's Office.
You want a Maserati, but you need an SUV. Why not have both? Levante, the Maserati of SUVs. Now available with 0% finance. Search Maserati. Based on PCP sales only until the 31st of August 2018. Minimum 20% deposit, 24-month term, 10,000 miles per annum. Subject to status. Participating dealers only. Maserati Financial Services.
My perfect sandwich? Well, it goes bread, lettuce, cheese, and then the Branston. Deliciously tangy. Its sweet scent alone sends my taste buds into a frenzy. A mountain of glorious pickle smothers the bread from crust to crust, ready to embrace its culinary soulmate, the creamy cheddar. Then cut it in half and you're done.
Try new Branston Smooth in a jar. All the great Branston taste without the chunks. Bring out the Branston.
Your future is here. The Global Academy. A forward-thinking state school for 14 to 19-year-olds interested in a media career. Get the very best start in your media career at a school where you can study GCSE and A-levels alongside the vocational media qualifications you need. Visit globalacademy.com to find out more.
We've been thinking, if you run a business, you can sometimes feel isolated. Because although it's great having no one to answer to, it's not so great having no one to talk to. But it doesn't always have to be lonely at the top. That's why we've created the NatWest Business Hub, where you'll find tools, insights and stories from customers facing the same challenges as you. Because changing times call for a proactive bank. Search NatWest Business Hub. NatWest. We are what we do.
This is LBC, live from Strasbourg, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
Well, we're going to spend £8 million. £8 million is going to be spent on encouraging 14 to 18-year-olds to become nurses. And Mark asks me, he says, £8 million, can you get an account of how this money is being spent? I doubt it. But the stories I'm getting about the stress levels, about the conditions, frankly, you've got to be an angel to want to be a nurse if it's really, really like that. Now, this time next week, we will all be gearing up for Donald Trump to hit Brussels before he gets into London, then maybe Scotland, and on to Helsinki for a meeting with Vladimir Putin. I am predicting that one of the big stories next week is going to be Trump at NATO. I think it could be explosive because there are 29 members of NATO and only a handful of them are paying the minimum 2% that is required. This is my prediction for where the argument will go next week. Just a quick look ahead to next week. You know, Mr. Trump will be at that NATO summit next week. You appear to be hell-bent on pushing for your European army, hell-bent for a foreign policy without veto, and hell-bent to be on a direct collision course with President Trump and with NATO. You can't have a European army and NATO existing side by side. And maybe your next big challenge is European citizens will need to work out who do they best feel protected by, a European army or America and NATO. I think I know what the decision of the people would be. Next week, we may well find out. That was me speaking in the parliamentary chamber today to total silence. Total silence. Nobody wanted to engage with me at all. But this is a big issue. And I think Trump is going to bang the table, really bang his fist on the table at this NATO summit next week and say, unless you guys are prepared to make a reasonable contribution, regardless of size, it's 2%, regardless whether you're big or whether you're small, you may well not be able to rely on American protection for the future. That, folks, is my prediction for what's going to be the big story breaking next Wednesday, Thursday. Let's go to Richard in Coventry, who's a new caller to the show. Richard, would you encourage people to become nurses?
Hi, Nigel. It's a pleasure to speak to you. My first point is that 1948, the NHS was in its concept, and for me, it's not now fit for purpose. Clearly, my son is a paramedic. He's done his 2 years at university. He's on 24 grand a year. He works 48-hour shifts, 12-hour shifts, 48-hour week, 12-hour shifts. And he's full on. The 4 days on that he works, he's just work. And he loves his job. My point is that we are trying to put a sticking plaster over every single thing that's wrong with sometimes in our society. So, as an example, he says to me 70 or 80% of his jobs that he goes to on an emergency call basis are not emergencies. He's been, as an example, Nigel, he's been to people with shaving cuts. He's been to people with, bizarrely enough, wind. So they turn up and they've just got wind from the meal that they've eaten. It's just the cause and the wastage that appears to be happening. It just seems bizarre to me. You know, your point is absolutely right. If we hadn't opened the floodgates 10, 12 years ago, would we need all these extra NHS people now? And clearly, we're trying to stop.
We're playing catch up, Richard, aren't we? We're playing catch up.
Nigel, playing catch up. And to give you another example of that, you know, he's a fantastic guy. He went to a guy a couple of weeks ago. He's a heroin addict. He's got a leg ulcer, and believe it or not, Nigel, these guys and the nurses, they have to clean these wounds. They've got maggots in them and all this sort of nasty stuff. And the call comes through, and it's a regular call. It's so-and-so again, and away they go, and they don't want to lift to the blooming hospital because they know they can have a taxi service, and it is just bizarre,
That's
Nigel.
awful.
It's bizarre.
That is awful.
Bizarre.
Do you know? I mean, I'm sure it's against the rules, Richard. But I mean, it would be wonderful if an undercover reporter could, without revealing his identity, just cover a working week and to see some of this waste. Because what you've just said has really shocked me. What a terrible waste of our resources. And I know people, I mean, on a lesser level, I know people, working in GP surgeries, booking the appointments, and they have what they call their regulars. People coming in every week to see the doctor without any real need to. And then those that book appointments and don't bother to turn up because, I don't know, the horses are on the telly or whatever it is. So, no, I mean, quite how we deal with those problems, Richard, I don't know. But the one thing I'm pleased about, as I said 3 calls back, the fact that your son is doing a job, he's not been paid a fortune, he's working long hours. Thank goodness, Richard, we have people like him, eh?
Fantastic, Nigel. He's absolutely fantastic. And I do really feel strongly about people that assault our NHS teams. Clearly, we need to get stronger with that because it's just totally unacceptable.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for the call. Thank you. Peter on Facebook says, pay nurses more. Simple. Decrease management costs. Well, Peter, that might help. More money might help. But if it's ultra stressful and the culture's tough, more money on its own would not, I think, solve this problem. My granddaughter has studied for 5 years, just passed her exams to be a cancer nurse. She graduated in August, passed with honours. Very proud of her, and she has a job. Pat, I'm sure you are very proud of her. Gina says, there are many stories these days people can tell you. No amount of recruitment or throwing money at it will help the cause. I'm afraid it's lost its way. Well, Gina, actually, I've had to sum up the phone calls I've had so far this evening. That would be a reasonably good summation. I worked in the 1970s, and there is no comparison to today. Back then, there wasn't the compensation culture, and people had respect for medical staff and accepted that. Particularly, the elderly are ignored, so I don't think the medical staff are as fair as they used to be either, says Anne in Kingston. Well, I don't know about the last part, but and we do see some horrendous cases in the newspapers of that, but it doesn't mean that it's widespread. But I think the compensation culture clearly is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. In America, it's got so bad that healthcare costs are just through the roof. Major problem over there. Steve in Brentford is a new caller to the show. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening. Thanks very much for everything you've done. The simple reason I think people would balk at becoming nurses is the sheer cost they have to pay to become nurses. They had to do a 3-year degree, and that normally leaves people between £55,000 and £60,000 in debt, which means that when they are finally working, these poor people, they have a far higher tax bill because they're paying not only their 20% income tax, but they're also paying their 9% Willits tax, which is
Once they're earning over a certain level,
5% hike on the bill, and that is going to turn people off. And anybody like Martin Lewis, who says it's not a debt, is talking nonsense. If I owe you money under any terms, it's a debt, and I think that is something that needs to be looked at. We can go on employing Filipino nurses till the cows come home, where they're trained by the state, but until here we have a system where we train these people and don't put them in this hideous debt. That is it. That's all I wanted to say. You've got
it's a fair point, Steve. Quite why they have to have a degree anyway, I'm not too sure about. But hey, there we are. That's the culture we've got. Thank you for your call. Thank you, all of you, for your call. I have to say, I think as a parent, if a child desperately wants to do something, you want to encourage them to follow their dream. But clearly, in many cases, through experience, some are telling people, maybe you should find another dream. Now, a story here that does amuse me. Chris Hope in the Telegraph today, bid to stop Trump and Farage meeting. Theresa May has been accused of trying to stop Donald Trump from meeting Nigel Farage on his visit to the UK next week. A Whitehall source has said a ban on a meeting with Farage, the former UKIP leader, is a red line for number 10 Downing Street in the negotiations about the visit to the UK on Friday next week. The source said the president must not meet Farage in talks over the itinerary. Well, this is undoubtedly true. because the government hates me and thinks that I'm responsible for Brexit, which they still don't support or believe in. But you know what? Given that I've got some good relations with the US, you'd have thought I might be helpful to you. Clearly, I'm not wanted. Never mind. There we are. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow at 7. Coming up at 10 o'clock tonight, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you. Coming up at 9, it's the Health Hour. This week, GP Dr. Mike Smith will be here on medical questions, whether you are ill or you just want to stay healthy. We're going to talk about the rise of measles in this country as well. Also later, MPs have called for a major reform of the Home Office after the Windrush scandal in a report published today. We'll look at that. We'll have more on the boys stuck in a cave in Thailand. I'll be talking to a